So welcome back. This is Night Flight. As you can see, Wayne McRoy is back, and our topic of the day will be the mystery of our blood. What's up with that? So, Wayne, before we do that, because it is going on, and of course the it also hit here in Europe, Brazil, and all over the place. What do you make of this game of drones?
Oh man, this is a multifaceted psyop in my view. I really think it is. They're they've taken the whole UFO phenomenon and they've rebranded it into the UAP phenomenon, and now they're rebranding it again and calling it mystery drones. And this is what gets me because some people are reporting some of these things they're seeing. They don't really fit the description of what you would consider a drone. Now, some of them may, but a lot of them they're describing as being like the size of a car or an SUV or even school buses and this kind of thing. Well, how do you know that's a drone then? How do you know there's not a pilot in that's not some type of an aircraft that with a pilot in it? You don't. So I find it compelling that the media has taken this and they've pushed this notion of drones. And what is at the heart of all of this? Well, like I said, I think it's a multifaceted type of an agenda going on. I think it's a psychological operation, first and foremost, to get people used to the idea of all of these things up in the sky that we're not quite sure what they are. And maybe they're drones of surveillance type of apparatus or other things. And maybe there's some other factor involved. Now, if you look at some of the video that's been coming in from around the world, a lot of these things don't really fit the mode of what we would accept as modern aircraft. A lot of these things seem to perform in ways that go beyond what our accepted state of the art technologies are. So I think there's something else going on as well. And I think governments of the world understand what this is and aren't sharing. And I think it's a combination of these different things. Now, I've also come to discover through a bit of research and looking into this phenomenon here that some of these things are definitely drones, no doubt about it. And like I said, I think that has to do with getting people used to the fact of having these things flying around in the sky. And the way the public is with this stuff, at some point they'll get used to it and they'll say, nothing to see. We're used to that now. These drones flying around all the time. It's just a drone. And they won't pay attention to it anymore. But what is it really doing there? That's the other question. And then when you look at the other side of this, the side that is not something you can explain by standard technologies, there's a combination of things going on. Now, some of these drones that have been identified that we can see are something that's called loitering munitions. If you've ever heard that term, if you haven't, I would strongly suggest look it up. What this is a multi-use type of a drone. They're relatively expensive. They range in prices in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So this is not something your average drone enthusiast will be flying around. This is a military technology. So that tells me they know what they have there. They know what it is, and they're not being forthright about this. So this gives me a reason to be even more concerned because now we're looking at this phenomenon going on concurrently with what we would see as UFOs in the past. And that makes me believe maybe they're going to go for this whole blue beam angle of things. Once again, we've seen this. This has been talked about in conspiracy circles for a very long time. Project Blue Beam, in and of itself, was never an actual program that
Mhm.
ever existed in reality. But the technologies certainly do exist to make that happen. And these are some of the technologies that could potentially make it look like there's an alien threat or something. All they have to do is have these things in the sky showing up all around the world. And then all of a sudden, one day, a target blows up, something blows up somewhere, and they blame it on the UFO phenomenon and say maybe there's an alien invasion or some such thing going on. Well, they could accomplish this with what these loitering munitions do. Because, like I said, what this is a drone that can operate in a surveillance capacity, or it could operate also autonomously as a system for targeting something, a target of some sort, and blowing it up. It really is something I find hugely concerning. And if they're not telling us that's what this is, that gives me all the more reason to be concerned. And they've even gone so far as to try and say it's the Iranians. And although they come out and out of the other side of their mouth, they say we don't see any potential threats here. We don't see any risk to national security or any such thing. But at the same time, they say we don't know what these things are or why all of a sudden there's so many. Well, somebody's being disingenuous within the realms of government. So I think it's something we need to be concerned with, but I think what's going to happen is it will largely begin to disappear out of the news cycle, and people will forget about it and get used to seeing weird stuff in the skies and go about their business like usual. So we'll see what happens. I reserve the right to be wrong on all of that stuff, but it seems to me it's a huge psychological operation going on. It's to accustom people to seeing things in the sky, and maybe they could use it to finally pull off their Project Bluebeam thing that they would like to pull off.
Mhm. Yeah, I saw one video today that was captured in California, and that was so weird. There was a cloud, and it looked as if the cloud exploded, and a lot of electric discharge went through that. It was so bizarre. And yeah, I can imagine a lot of things where they could take it. Um, we also heard that today Kamala Harris and the Biden family rushed back to the White House, cut their vacation short. Yeah, maybe it's because of the shutdown. Uh, Others are speculating that they are going to introduce the ETs to us. And yeah, we will see. But I totally agree. It feels like a psyops. And but something is going on. Just we don't know. And this narrative, yeah, we don't know what it is, but it is not dangerous. Yeah, how do you know?
No, that's the thing. I mean, we need to have our concerns. And honestly, at this point, I'm so tired of the apocalypse. Like, seriously. Nothing would surprise me at this point. If Biden comes out on TV and introduces the ETs, I wouldn't be surprised at this point. Let's be honest here. It things have gotten so weird so quick here that it just wouldn't even be a shock anymore. And in fact, everybody'd be out there saying, "Nuh-uh, they're not real," because that's how it is anymore. You can't believe your eyes anymore, and that's something that's been weaponized against us too. It's not a matter of what's true and what's not true anymore. It's just they inundate us with so much information that it's information overload, and it doesn't matter what's true and what's not true. They don't want us to believe anything they tell us. And that's the whole point. They've got us to the point where we're so jaded that we don't believe anything that's presented to us anymore. And they could present us with truth and we would say, "Nuh-uh." And that's just the way that it is. And that's the state of the psychological operations that have gone on. That's all part of it. And it's hard to even determine, are a lot of these videos we're seeing posted of these UAP phenomena, are they real? Are they legit? Or are they maybe computer generated, AI generated images and stuff like this? We don't know. And that's the problem. It's become so difficult to determine what's true and what's not true, what is real and what's not real anymore. The line is so thin that they just have us right where they want us, because then they could institute all kinds of social policy changes to accommodate this new reality, whether it's a reality or not. And people will just go along with it because it's like, I don't believe it's true. And, they'll just go about doing their thing anyway. And it's all part of the grander psyop going on. So it's so hard to determine what's factual and what's not anymore. And that's all part of it. But we are seeing this notion of a government shutdown again. We get it this time every single year. It's always the same thing. They'll pass the bill at the last hour and everything will continue on like always. That's always what they do. They always have to put this fear in people's minds. And now they're actually actively talking about electing Elon Musk as Speaker of the House. I'm not kidding. That's been in the news media the past couple of days here. I guess Ron Paul came out, or Rand Paul, I think it was Rand Paul, came out and said, you don't actually have to be a member of Congress to actually be in that role. So it's definitely something that's feasible. They could potentially put Elon Musk as the Speaker of the House. That's the third guy in charge for people that are familiar with American government. You have the president, the vice president, and then the third guy in charge would be the Speaker of the House. How in the world did we allow this to happen? Like, seriously, it hasn't happened yet, but there's some serious talk about that being potentially something that could happen.
Yeah.
And it's massively concerning, especially if you delve a little bit into Elon Musk's background. I mean, his grandfather was a major proponent of the Technocracy movement in Canada. So it's really a concerning thing. This is the same old power players with the same old grip for power going on that's been going on for a long time. And the people are eating it up. And that's what I don't get. Like, the people were so jaded and so upset with the policies of the Biden administration that they're just rooting for Trump, and they want him to get in office already and get things done and reverse some of the damage that's been done. And in the meantime, he's aligning his cabinet with all of these, well, political class of people that have been in operation and power for years, this shadow government, if you will, that goes on. So nothing's going to change. And in fact, it's probably going to get exponentially worse, but people will cheer it on because it's their guy in there now. And that's something I find hugely problematic, because people have become so jaded by the system that they think somehow this guy is going to change it, even though he was in there for 4 years and didn't drain the swamp like he promised. And now they're going to give him 4 more years to do the same, and he's going to double down all the more on the things that have been done. It's all political theater, and it's all the same people working on the same team, and it's not for the common people. Let's put it that way. But that's enough of my little tirade. I'll get off my soapbox about politics now.
Yeah, Devan Boma, he recently did a video suggesting that the spirit of Marduk lives in Elon Musk. And so he lines it all out and he says, and now imagine Marduk is in the White House.
And that's not a stretch too far in my imagination either. The guy was openly out there wearing a Baphomet costume. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I think he still has that up as one of his, I don't know, profile pictures or something on some social media somewhere.
Yeah. He also showed the images, of these Marduk depictions that holds these two sticks that he is holding that look like an axe. And but in the real Marduk story, yeah, the other ones blew up his spaceport and then he was banned here. Yeah, we will see how all of this develops. And I am pretty sure 2025 will be an even more interesting year than 2020.
No doubt. Just as a little added aside, if you do the etymology on Elon Musk's name, do you know what it means? I don't know if I ever shared this on here before, but I have in the past on some programs I've done in the past. Elon Musk's name, if you trace the roots to it etymologically, it means the root of the stench. That's what it means.
Okay.
You can't make this stuff up. That's really what it means. Elon is like a tree or a tree root, a type of tree. And Musk, of course, is a bad smell. So it's the root of the stench. That's what it etymologically breaks down to.
Okay. So, yeah, our blood. In general, we would think, yeah, okay, it's a delivery system. It brings nutrients and oxygen into the cells. It also, yeah, does away with metabolical waste products that we have. and that is it. There's nothing more to it. But obviously, that cannot be the whole story because otherwise, we wouldn't have some people completely obsessed with blood covenants, blood sacrifices, and what have you. So, what is it? We dive in.
Well, in a lot of the occult systems, the blood actually, and we're actually informed in religious circles too, the blood is the life. So in essence, the blood is the physical manifestation of the soul in our physical world here. And it represents the soul. And that's why these people are so obsessed with blood. That's why they take blood oaths. You'll hear in some of the old stories and stuff about people making pacts with the devil or something. They will sign the document in blood with their own blood. This is why, because in the occult, this is considered to be the source or the root of where the soul exists. And that's why it's even said in the book of Genesis in the Bible, when Cain murdered Abel, his blood cried out from the ground. This was his soul crying out. And God, the Creator, heard this in the garden, heard Abel's blood crying out from the ground. And he went and asked Cain about, hey, where's your brother? And this kind of story comes out from that. So we have this notion in the occult that the blood is the actual physical element in which the soul exists in the human being. And this is where you get the legend of vampires and stuff like that too. They are not really a soul in their container. In order to maintain their soul existence in that physical undead body, they need to feed on blood because this is wherein the soul resides. So it's an interesting way of looking at things. And this is just one of the occult aspects of it. And there's so much more to it that it's very hard to cover or encapsulate all of it. But we do have this group of dark occultists at the top of the power structure in this world that are obsessed with bloodlines and family bloodlines. And a lot of this they trace back to the very roots of humanity in the modern era. And they try to trace their lineage back as far as they can, and they try to attach themselves to the lineage of Cain of the Bible, whether that's actually true or not. Doesn't matter. They always try to associate themselves with that because they think somehow that gives them a semi-divine right to rule. Because the story, if you go into the Kabbalistic teachings, is that Cain was actually the son of Eve and Samael, the fallen angel. And this is only part of the story. Okay, there's different names for him. They also call him Azazel. He's gone by other different names, this fallen angelic figure, in the different mythologies and the different systems of occultism that you look in. But Cain was his offspring, and therefore they try to attach themselves to that bloodline because they see themselves as having a divine right to rule then, because they are part angelic or fallen angelic. So they see themselves as being semi-divine and therefore more spiritually evolved than the rest of us. So they try to attach themselves to that bloodline. And this is something that a lot of researchers have gone at, one in particular named Fritz Springmeier, where he actually goes back and he looks at the 13 royal family bloodlines of the Illuminati. And this book is hugely compelling because not only does he do a lot of deep research into this and connect the dots for you, but it's also come to the radar of the intelligence agencies. You can actually find this as a free PDF download from the CIA's website, the Central Intelligence Agency here in the US. They found this so important that they put it on their website. And that should tell people something right there. The fact that something like this, some conspiracy nutter stuff like this is actually up on the CIA's website and they take it seriously, should be compelling enough for people to look into it a little bit further. So he names these 13 royal family bloodlines, and all the last names and stuff do change over the course of time, but they do try to associate themselves back to these certain few bloodlines. So the blood in and of itself, not only is it considered in occultism to be the physical seat or manifestation point of the soul in our reality, it's also something that's massively important for those that consider themselves the ruling class of this world, because they want to somehow see their blood as being different than the blood of the commoners. And this is where you get the term the blue bloods, right? The blue bloods. And all of this gets traced back into ancient mythology. When you go and look, the blue bloods, they called their blood ichor back in the ancient Romanized versions of the Greek myths. And they considered themselves to be of a divine nature. The Olympians, and that's what they still call themselves, these ones that are in these positions of power, they refer to themselves as the Olympians. Even still today, there's something to that notion. They tie it back to the ancient Greek mythology and the Romanized version of Greek mythology. So that's another important concept that goes with this. And there's just so many different directions to go with this, things we could physically look at in the nature of blood here to try to find some differentiation, as well as the philosophical or the sort of pseudo religious aspects of it as well, the spiritual side. So there's a lot of different ground to cover here. So what are your thoughts, and where should we go next?
Before I find it interesting that you mentioned vampires, because while I was preparing for this interview, I stumbled on an article that I found quite interesting. And it talks about vampires, and they say here it is called a disease, porphyria, and it was very prevalent among Eastern European royal families. And here are the symptoms of porphyria. Sensitivities to sunlight, because their skin disintegrates because of this blood disease. Kind of fangs, because the gum recedes and it exposes the teeth. Their urine is dark red, and that led people to believe that they are drinking blood. They have an aversion to garlic, but that is because the sulfur content of the garlic could lead to an attack of porphyria. Yeah, so this comes in stages. There might be days, yeah, you still look horrible because your tissue is disintegrated, but you are not in pain. But garlic is something that brings forward the pain again of this disease. And yeah, avoiding mirrors. Yeah, they say that is because they do not want to see how disfigured they already look. And fear of crucifix. Yeah, during the Spanish Inquisition, 600 so-called vampires were burnt at the stake, and a lot of them were people that were suffering from porphyria. So yeah, that would explain why they are not too happy about Christian symbols.
Well, there's a lot there to unpack, and certainly this is how the scientific world gives you an explanation of this stuff. They identify it as some type of a disease state. Is that really all it is? I don't accept that. There's more to it, because that completely disregards the whole spiritual component, and there's always a spiritual component,
Yeah.
especially as it pertains to the notion of blood. And these people have been known to drink blood or consume blood, and we see that even going on today in a lot of these dark occult places, these dark occult rituals and stuff that are said to be performed. You can see there's that component ever present. And then you talk about adrenochrome and stuff like that that is associated with the blood as well. And you could begin to see how there is this type of vampire culture, I guess, that exists in the underground in some of these subcultures of occultism that goes with that. And of course, the royal families of Europe have always seem to be just a step away from this stuff. So it's interesting that that's brought up in that scientific paradigm type of way of thinking. And certainly there may be something to that, but it does kind of lead you astray from the spiritual aspect of it. And there's always a spiritual aspect, like I said. So it's not quite a full explanation of vampirism, because there's other forms of vampirism that go on too. So there's spiritual vampirism, there's emotional vampirism, there's energy vampirism of all different kinds that goes on that's associated with this, not necessarily directly involving the blood, but when you've been in the presence of an energy vampire, you feel drained by these people. And certainly there is such a thing that happens, and our modern science can't adequately explain that. But I think it has to do with the auric field around us, our energy field. And this takes looking into some different modalities of metaphysics to understand how that all operates. But certainly there have been some of these dark magicians in the past that are acknowledging to be voluntary energy vampires, and there's also what they call involuntary energy vampires out there. So it's an interesting juxtaposition here. Excuse me one second. Apologies, I still have a nagging cough going on, so if I pause frequently, I apologize.
May I suggest some oregano oil?
I have oregano oil, and I do take it actually when I do feel something coming on. But I'm at the tail end of this, but I just have that stupid nagging tickle in my throat periodically.
So energy vampires, yes, I'm not only aware, I'm quite familiar with them. And but in the entertainment industry, it's more or less only about the blood drinking types. So would you say that there is also something to it?
Oh, certainly. I think there is something to the whole notion. Certainly, we could see all of these recorded traditions relating to the whole vampire notion. And of course, fiction has popularized a lot of this. And there's a reason this is being pushed in modern culture as it is. I mean, the vampire entertainment factor thing that goes along with this, we have with the advent of the story of Dracula, Bram Stoker telling the story of Dracula. And since then, we have all of these monster movies and stuff like that relating to vampires, even right down to preteen culture with the Twilight series and all of this. They're trying to popularize the notion in certain ways, or try to romanticize the notion, make it look like it's something attractive and it has something to do with immortality, which is one of the precursor psychological campaigns to normalize transhumanism, in my viewpoint. I definitely see the correlation there. And that also relates to the blood, because it's by altering the blood that they could change the human being, or change the evolutionary process of the human being. And we see how they've introduced into the culture different ways in which they could change up the DNA in people, in their blood, with various technologies out there. And this is probably going out on YouTube, so I don't want to speak anything specific here.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I guess we all know. A certain jumbo juice that was suggested.
Yes. I think you understand where I'm going with this, but that's all part of it too. It's all about transmuting the blood in a lot of different ways. And there are some physical factors that occur in blood in the scientific paradigm of things that they truly don't understand at an adequate level either. And there's something to this RH factor in the blood, this component of the RH factor as well, the RH negative and RH positive factor. So they seem to look for some type of a connection associated with that in people as to whether people belong to what they would consider one of the royal bloodlines or not. At least that's the takeaway I've gotten from this. If they show up as being RH negative, that means that they are more closely associated to this royal bloodline, this royal lineage. Whereas the Rh positive factor, that's just the rest of us, and they see us as a bunch of stupid monkeys. And that's one of the connotations that's come along with that. That's why it's called the rhesus factor. It's named after the rhesus macaque, monkey. So there's this association, and they'll tell you that it has nothing to do with it at all in the scientific paradigm, and they'll tell you that's all silly. But once again, this falls back on the whole notion of the green language, the twilight language, the phonetic Kabbalah, the different ways that language has been weaponized against us. The sounds like is like game. That's what I like to call it. So rhesus factor, well, they're telling you how closely related to the monkey are you? And if you're not closely related to the monkey, that makes you semi-divine. And if you are more closely related to the monkey, that makes you a dumb animal, a human resource to be used and manipulated by these people. So they've played these psychological games, and whether there's actually something to that or not, I don't know. I can't say for certain, but it does seem to be one of the factors they look for in their obsession with looking at bloodlines. They look at this Rh factor, and there's a very small percentage of the population that tests Rh negative. And a lot of this centralizes in the Basque region as to where the majority of this bloodline comes from. And it's a mysterious culture because their language is not related to any other known language on Earth. It's unique, the Basque language, the leftover of the Basque language. So you have this notion that's popular in some of the occult circles that the Basque people are the direct descendants of the Atlanteans. And once again, it falls back to this whole notion of a prior culture, a prior civilization called Atlantis, and these different root races that we have talked about here previously. So this is wherein one of the connotations comes in as to what exactly they're looking for with this rhesus factor. And there are some actual physical differences in this being Rh negative or Rh positive that we could look at if you'd be interested in exploring that way of thinking as well.
Yeah, but before we do, I mean, not every person that is Rh negative belongs to the royals.
No, certainly not. But it seems to be an important thing that they look for. And I don't know exactly what the connotation is. I think there's certain lineages. There's also what's called the lineage of the Ashkenazi Jews that tends to have a large amount of this Rh negative blood factor in it too. So there's different components to it, and there's different areas wherein they look. And I don't know what their exact criteria for sorting this out is, but the Rh negative portion of it is one of the things that they look for. Now, I do suspect there are other things they look for when they're looking at blood typing and stuff like that to try and find this connection. But I don't know exactly what that is, and I don't know if anybody out there has any more context into what it is that they look for along with that. But certainly a lot of people have connected the dots with this Rh factor to what it is that these psychopaths seem to look for as far as trying to connect themselves to these royal bloodlines. So that's part of it. And there's some notes here I'll bring up talking about some of the differences, the physiological differences between Rh positive and Rh negative blood. I do have some notes on that, so bear with me a moment.
Go
I'll pull
ahead.
that, and we'll go from there, because this is an important thing to look at. Where is it? Here we go. Rh factor. I've actually I've done shows on this in the past. We did a Crow 777 radio episode talking about the Rh factor and some different associations with it. So I do have some of those notes here, and a lot of this has to do with being susceptible to a type of bacteria called Toxoplasma gondii. If you're familiar with this, it's a parasitic type of
That
a
what
causes
toxoplasmosis?
It causes toxoplasmosis, but it also has other distinctions to it, and we'll get into that. So the Rh negative blood types have an innate resistance to this Toxoplasma gondii. as it's called. Now, what this is this is a parasitic protozoan that infects most animals and sometimes humans, but is only known to reproduce in felines, in cats. This is the thing that's associated with cats, if you've ever heard of this before. It can
Yeah, I
alter
have.
people's
My
behavior.
husband was, before he died, he was in the hospital a long, long time because he was treated for toxoplasmosis.
Yes, this is one of the things that can cause toxoplasmosis. But
Mm.
this one, this Toxoplasm gondii, is a little bit different because what this does is this could actually change people's behaviors. It could change, it's known to change behaviors in mice. So mice pick this up from cats, and these mice become more, I don't know, trusting of the cats and less afraid of the cats. It causes them less natural fear of the cats, and therefore the cats can eat them much more easily. Now, this also has been seen in humans. This gives humans this type of a bond with cats. And you'll hear about this because if you're a human being that has a lot of cats, and you've heard the trope of the crazy cat lady and stuff like that. Well, there's an actual physiological mechanism to that has to do with this Toxoplasm gondii. Well, the Rh negative factor blood types have a type of natural resistance to this that Rh positive don't. Now, this is something that I find very interesting because why is that? Well, we don't totally understand the mechanism of action for all of that, but it says here in my notes, Rh negative blood types do have some negative connotations attached with them as well. Rh factor has been shown to control renal function and male fertility, and as such, scientific evidence suggests that males with Rh negative blood types have lower fertility rates. That means in order to propagate Rh negative factor, it's more probable to do so with a male that carries the Rh negative factor as a recessive trait. This would explain why certain cultures track heritage through the female lineage rather than through the male. And this falls back to the Ashkenazi Jews once again,
Mm.
track it through the female lineage. So this would explain why the elite royal family bloodlines sometimes intermarry with commoner blood types as well, because they're less fertile with the Rh negative factor. Now, I put all of these notes together years ago. We did this show way back probably in 2018, I want to say. So, like a lot of this is not anything new. It's been out there for a while, but we have all of these associations made here, and this Toxoplasm gondii may be one of the reasons why people that seem to be Rh positive seem to be more trusting of perhaps some of these other people because maybe they're affected by this. It's shown, it's been scientifically demonstrated that this Toxoplasm gondii can alter the behavior in rats. And what are one of the things that they use in the lab when they test things to see how people react? Well, rats. So because it can change and alter the behaviors of the rats and make them more trusting of their predator class, the cat, is it not possible that maybe being Rh positive and being exposed to Toxoplasm gondii can make you more trusting of your predatory class, which would be more of these maybe associated with the Rh negative factor as well, make you more trusting of the authority figure? It seems feasible that there might be something to that. Now, whether that all pans out or not, who could say for sure? But it just seems like it's circumstantial evidence that points that maybe that's the case. So we do have some physiological differences. And there's other things that were just discovered within the course of the past 10 years about this Rh factor, and it may have more of a role in how our bodies fight off different toxins as well. The Rh negative fights off toxins in a different way than the Rh positive. So let me find my notes on this. It's been a while since I looked at this stuff, so hard to say for sure. Where is it? We could maybe take a look at this whole notion of the Greek gods and the blue bloods and the ichor and where all that comes from down here before we get back to the strictly physical scientific side of this.
So if this is a result of a protozoa, It does, but not everybody has that.
No, not everybody has that, but I find that interesting that in ancient cultures like the Egyptians, they held cats in such high regard. And we could see how maybe that plays a factor into this as well. But it seems to me that there are some traits within the Rh negative bloodlines where they're resistant to this. Maybe they're a little bit more of a free thinker. Maybe they're a little bit less prone to trusting the authority figures because of this. This toxoplasm gondii is a pretty common thing. I forget what the percentage is, but it's estimated that there's a very high percentage of homes here in Western culture that have this toxoplasm gondii present. And it's not just cat owners, but that's where they reproduce. Now, especially if you have a high cat population in different areas, this makes it more prevalent. So perhaps there's something to that. Perhaps there's not. These were just some conjectures that I was making on this because this is stuff that is validated in scientific research and in laboratory conditions and stuff like that. So there might be something to that association, but it's hard to say for sure what exactly it is that these people look for as far as the blood goes. And there's so many different concepts associated with it. So we have, if you want to go back and look at this notion of the Olympian bloodlines, you can see the story of the blue bloods here as to what they claim about themselves. So they have ichor. This is how they described the blue blood of the gods, of the Olympians, if you want to call it that. And this ties again to the Rh negative link. So here's the story of ichor and rhesus O negative blood type. The Greek gods frequently cavorted with humans. Any offspring resulting from these shenanigans had a 50-50 chance of inheriting their blood group from either the mother or the father, as it is today with humans. We aren't talking about any old blood here. We're talking ichor. If a child resulting from an affair between a god and a human was lucky enough to end up with ichor running through their veins, it was a very special child indeed, set apart from us ordinary humans. It was a king. So now ichor is blue in color. You can find it mentioned as black or green, but this is to be found in books such as Dungeons and Dragons or Harry Potter. The ichor of the ancient Greeks is blue, or some say maybe gold. Now, keep that in mind. This is an important component to all of this, too. The blue and the gold. Have we seen blue and gold in recent years cropping up over and over again? What with conflicts in Ukraine, the Ukrainian flag, the blue and the gold. It was pre-echoed back in, what was it, the 2022
EU flag.
Right. Yeah, and we have all of this stuff, the blue and the gold. Well, blue and gold is a direct correlation to this ichor. And that's a whole separate side tangent to go down. I don't want to get into the whole color philosophy thing, but blue blood, the color of the blood running in the veins of the Greek gods and the European royals. A large percentage of European royalty have the blood group rhesus O negative. Only 5% of the world's population have this blood group. The blood group rhesus O negative certainly has special properties. A person with this blood group can receive blood only from this group, but can give their own blood to absolutely anybody, regardless of blood type. So it has been said people with rhesus O negative blood type have rather a bluish hue about them and are not newborn babies with rhesus O negative blood type called blue babies. And certainly you could look all this stuff up. This is all tradition that's been around for a long time. So it's said that people with this Rh negative factor, these blue bloods, kind of have like a more grayish or bluish tinge to their skin. The blood itself doesn't necessarily look blue, but it is said in Greek mythology that the blood was blue in these true gods or Olympians. So we see ourselves talking about this. And we see these Olympians, this connection to the Olympian side of things being presented here. Now, this all goes into the modern mythology and occult systems here that they look at, and they've associated it with the rhesus factor. So we have all of that different connotation. So this is why, one of the things why these people seem to consider themselves to be somehow more evolved than the rest of us And they do attach it to this rhesus factor in some way, shape, or form. So is there something to it? I don't know. It doesn't seem like there's all that many differences between Rh positive and negative in the physical spectrum of things. But for some reason, these elitists are just absolutely obsessed with this, and they look for it. And that's why you have them collecting all of this data and stuff in their databases, looking to see who has this Rh factor, positive and negative, and who doesn't. So that being the case, we have some important distinctions there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just one factor of many that goes into this whole notion of blood. Now, if you remember back, we said on the occult side of things, they say the blood is the actual vehicle or the container in the physical world in which the soul manifests. So are we talking about maybe a different type of soul depending on the blood type? And that's why they seem to attach themselves to this notion of being of the lineage of Cain. It's the same as the Olympians from the Greek mythology. That's what they're trying to tie themselves to. So we have this important component to all of that. And that's just the physical side of it. But there's a lot more ground to cover with that. But I just thought it was interesting, this toxoplasm gondii connection, because I seem to think there might be something to that. And it has been discovered that cells in Rh negative blood, they process out toxins in a different way than they do in Rh positive people. So that in and of itself is an interesting juxtaposition to make too.
Do, I always mix this up. The Olympians, are those the ones that overthrew the Titans or the other way around?
They're the ones that overthrew the Titans.
Yeah,
Yes, the
okay.
ones that took over from the old gods. So you could once again see how it connects to mythology there. So yeah, the Olympians, and this is the group that claims to be in power today. This is how these elitists, this committee of 300 type organization, how they view themselves and what they call themselves. They refer to themselves as the Olympians. They think they're special in some way and that they are the real power brokers of this world. And in some sense, they kind of are. They make a lot of decisions for the rest of us, only because a lot of us have become so complacent and have been so separated from a classical education, learning about some of the old mythology and stuff like that, that we have no clue what they're talking about in their symbolic language. So that's the important factor here as well. So that's how they oftentimes will pull one over on us, by using this hidden communication system of symbology. And they put it out there in plain sight for people to see, but people don't understand the language, so they don't pick up on what's going on.
Mm.
And that's wherein this whole Olympian factor comes in, because that's how they operate.
What you mentioned with the colors blue and golden, it also reminds me of the pharaonic crowns. Yeah, you have a white crown, a blue crown, a red crown, a double crown. Um, and that are the colors of most flags, red, white, blue. Yeah. So in essence, they are telling you we are still in charge.
Essentially, yeah. I mean, if you know how to read the symbolism, that's exactly what they're telling you. And especially with the escalation of this whole Ukraine thing and just leading up to it, the months leading up to it prior, they were pre echoing this blue and gold color all over the place. And one place in particular, they pre echoed all of this just days before the Ukraine war thing broke out, with the Super Bowl here in America, the big football game, wherein they had the two teams that were competing. Well, the winner of the Super Bowl, their team colors are blue and gold, not a coincidence. And in the halftime show, they had Snoop Dogg performing, and he was wearing blue and gold. And they throw this out there in the face of the public. And then after this whole thing kicked off in the Ukraine, if you were on social media, on say Facebook or something like that, a lot of people, they would change their background picture to the blue and gold Ukrainian flag, and they had this all over the place. So there's the blue and the gold, and there's a reason for this. The blue and the gold are inherently important colors to these people in a symbolic way. The gold representing the old golden age of Saturn, and the blue being the feminine aspect thereof and the covering thereof, known as the Shekinah glory in the Christian theology. This blue is a covering, it's a protector. And if you think back to other things that went on since then, remember back all those big fires and stuff in Hawaii and California and all over the place that people were speculating that there were direct energy weapons involved. Well, what were they saying out there? They were making a lot of references to buildings with blue roofs on them, and that the blue somehow protected these buildings from catching fire and being destroyed. Well, this is a reference in the occult symbolism back to the Shekinah glory, the female side of God, the feminine side of God, the protection, the matrix, binding people in the matrix, the protective coating of the matrix, the veneer of the matrix, blue. And I know maybe it's a stretch for some people and they can't connect the dots. But when you look at matrix, what's the root word for matrix? Mater, the same root word for mother. It's always the female aspect. It's the divine feminine. It's this protective type of anointing that the color blue associates with. In classical alchemy, blue is a feminine color and red is the masculine color. And once again, you can make associations back to the blue bloods. And why is it that they trace their lineage through the woman in some of these different cultures? That's exactly why. It relates back in the Egyptian mythos to Isis, the protection of Isis, the goddess of magic, the feminine aspect of the Trinity. So when you look at all of these things from the symbolic perspective, it definitely relates to this notion of blue bloods. Well, why would they consider themselves blue bloods? Not necessarily because their blood was literally blue in color, but because that association of magic is in them. Magic relating to Isis, the color blue. Now, when you look
And
back,
Osiris was brought back to life with menstrual blood.
exactly. And see, all of this ties back to what's called the secret doctrine that is ever present in some of these mystery schools and some of these secret society groups. It ties to where the magicians say the real power comes from, and that's from the feminine side of God, the female aspect, which is Isis. This is why this is revered by these people, because they try to implement these different energetic principles in ways that they could leverage them against society at large. And that is part of the big secret that they don't want out there, is how do they get these things done? How do they do things? And it's all by invoking the presence of this Shekinah energy, if you want to call it that, the feminine aspect. And a lot of these different magicians out there of the different systems will tell you that's wherein the true power resides, is in the female side of the Trinity. And you can tie a lot of this back to a concept, a principle called Lilith. If you want to look back in old mythology, it's the Lilith principle. And we have a lot of this has become resurgent in popular culture in recent decades. I mean, look at one of the popular music festivals is called Lilith Fair, which predominantly puts on stage female artists. And there's a reason for this. This is all part of the invocation of this power side, the feminine principle, the divine feminine aspect of things to try to bring changes into society. And this is also one of the things that's been leveraged by militant feminism out there. That's another concept that's been weaponized in this way, feeding off of this energetic principle. Now, you could call all this nonsense if you want to, and a lot of people do think of it as nonsense, but look at the fruits of what's been done leveraging these ideas against the human mind. So whether you want to acknowledge it as being something that really has a type of mystic aspect to it or not, that's up to you to do. But I'm here to tell you, it doesn't matter if you believe it or not. There's people in positions of power in this world that very much believe in these concepts, and the things they do to act upon their beliefs will affect all of us. So it's important you understand what it is that they believe and what they're trying to leverage against you. And then you could begin to see more clearly. So this certainly has something to do with that, the whole blue blood component that oftentimes gets overlooked by people.
Yeah. You know what I ask myself sometimes? Throughout our lives, we have a couple of visits, some people more, some people less, to the doctor. Sometimes they do blood work, and I sometimes wonder what happens with all that blood. Yes, you would think, yeah, okay, they do the test and then they destroy it. Well, what else would they do? I'm not so sure about that.
I'm not so sure about that either. In fact, I've heard something to the effect that they actually collect that and put it in a centralized database. At least they will record the data of it and keep the data of it. Now, what they do with the actual physical blood, I don't know. You have to wonder what it is they do with that. But certainly there seems to be a sinister side to all of this, and a lot of it has to do with collecting genomic data from people at this point and putting everything in a centralized utility. What exactly are they looking for? First and foremost, I mean, they always look at these different blood factors and stuff like that with this. And of course, it all has to do with this whole notion of a centralized utility that contains all of your biometric data, all of your genomic data, all of your financial data, all of your social data, everything all in one utility. That's the big plan they want to put together. Digital ID coming soon, digital currency attached to it. They're really planning a lot of this stuff. It's all part of the panopticon system they want to put in place. And there is a component to it wherein they want to have some of your genetic material on file. And you have to wonder, what do they do when a baby's born? They test their blood and stuff right out of the gate with that. Does that in fact go into some type of a utility? Is that collected? Is it stored somewhere? I don't know. I don't have the answers to this. Maybe somebody in the biomedical field knows something about this. What do they do with that blood that they've collected? Now, I know they're supposed to perhaps dispose of the blood after they test it or whatever, but do they really do that? Or does it wind up stored somewhere? You have to wonder about all of this. Now, I know they collect data on the backside of all of it, and that could go into a centralized digital utility. But what do they do with the physical substance itself? That I don't have the answer to.
Hmm. Okay. So our first hour is gone, and in the second hour, I would like to go into blood oaths, blood sacrifices, and everything that is attached to that. So we will see the patrons on the other side.